What comes to mind when you hear the words Vietnam War? For many, it's images of jungle warfare, helicopters, and political turmoil. But this conflict, spanning 2 decades from 1955 to 1975, was far more complex than a few iconic images can convey. It was a war of ideologies, a struggle for independence, and a conflict that reshaped nations and defined a generation. So how did it all begin? Let's rewind the clock. The story really starts long before 1955. For nearly a century, Vietnam was under French colonial rule. After World War II, a powerful Vietnamese nationalist movement, led by the Communist revolutionary Ho Chi Minh, declared independence. This sparked the First Indochina War between France and the Viet Minh, Ho Chi Minh's forces. After a decisive Vietnamese victory at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the Geneva Accords were signed. These accords temporarily divided Vietnam into two zones at the 17th parallel: the communist-controlled North, led by Ho Chi Minh, and the anti-communist South, supported by the United States and other Western powers. The plan was to hold a nationwide election in 1956 to reunify the country. But those elections never happened. The South Vietnamese government, led by Ngo Dinh Diem, and its American backers feared that Ho Chi Minh would win a landslide victory. So the temporary division became a permanent, heavily fortified border. In the north, the government in Hanoi was determined to unify the country under its rule. In the south, the Diem regime grew increasingly authoritarian and unpopular, leading to widespread discontent. This created fertile ground for an insurgency. The National Liberation Front, also known as the Viet Cong, was formed in South Vietnam with the backing of the North. Their goal was simple: to overthrow the South Vietnamese government and reunify the country. This is where the United States' involvement deepens. Driven by the domino theory, the fear that if one Southeast Asian country fell to communism, others would follow, the U.S. began sending military advisors and financial aid to South Vietnam in the late 1950s. Under President John F. Kennedy, the number of these advisors grew into the thousands. They weren't supposed to be combat troops, but the line between advising and fighting quickly blurred. The situation was escalating, setting the stage for a much larger conflict. The turning point came in August 1964 with the Gulf of Tonkin incident. The U.S. claimed that its naval destroyer, the USS Maddox, was attacked without provocation by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. While the details of this incident are still debated by historians, it was all the justification President Lyndon B. Johnson needed. The U.S. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, granting Johnson broad authority to use military force in Vietnam, without a formal declaration of war. By 1965, the first official U.S. combat troops were landing in Da Nang, and Operation Rolling Thunder, a massive bombing campaign against North Vietnam, had begun. The Americanization of the war was complete. The war that unfolded was unlike any other. This wasn't a war of clear front lines and conventional battles. It was a guerrilla war, fought in dense jungles, rice paddies, and bustling villages. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army, or NVA, were experts at this kind of warfare. They used extensive tunnel networks, booby traps, and ambush tactics to wear down their technologically superior enemy. For American soldiers, the enemy was often invisible, and the line between civilian and combatant was dangerously blurred. The constant threat of ambush and the psychological toll of a war without clear objectives created immense stress and low morale. Back home in the United States, public opinion was sharply divided. In the early years, many Americans supported the war, seeing it as a necessary stand against the spread of global communism. But as the war dragged on and casualties mounted, a powerful anti-war movement emerged. Television brought the brutal reality of the conflict into American living rooms for the first time. Images of wounded soldiers and civilian suffering fueled protests on college campuses and in major cities. The draft, which sent thousands of young men to fight, became a major point of contention. The nation was torn apart by debates over the war's purpose, its morality, and its cost. 1968 was a pivotal and devastating year. In January, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong launched the Tet Offensive, a massive coordinated surprise attack on cities and military bases all across South Vietnam. Militarily, the offensive was a failure for the Communists, who suffered catastrophic losses, but politically, it was a stunning victory. The sheer scale of the attack shattered the American public's belief that the war was being won, and that there was light at the end of the tunnel. Trust in the government plummeted. That same year, President Johnson, facing immense political pressure, announced he would not seek re-election, The war had claimed a presidency. Richard Nixon won the 1968 election on a promise of peace with honor. His strategy was Vietnamization, a policy of gradually withdrawing U.S. troops, while building up the South Vietnamese army to fight the war on its own. While American troop numbers did decrease, the war itself expanded. Nixon authorized secret bombing campaigns in neighboring Cambodia and Laos to disrupt North Vietnamese supply lines along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This expansion of the conflict led to even more outrage and protests back in the United States. Most tragically at Kent State University, where National Guardsmen killed 4 student protesters in 1970. After years of grueling negotiations, the Paris Peace Accords were finally signed in January 1973. The agreement called for a ceasefire and the complete withdrawal of all remaining U.S. troops. For America, the war was officially over. But for the Vietnamese, the fighting continued. Without the support of American air power and resources, the South Vietnamese army struggled to hold back the determined North Vietnamese forces. In the spring of 1975, the North launched its final decisive offensive. The South Vietnamese army collapsed with shocking speed. On April 30, 1975, North Vietnamese tanks rolled through the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. The war was over. Vietnam was finally reunified but under communist rule. The legacy of the Vietnam War is profound and long-lasting. The human cost was staggering. It's estimated that up to 2 million Vietnamese civilians lost their lives, along with over 1 million North and South Vietnamese soldiers. More than 58,000 Americans were killed, and hundreds of thousands more were left with physical and psychological scars. For Vietnam, the war left the country devastated, its landscape poisoned by Agent Orange and littered with unexploded ordnance. It took decades for its economy to recover. In the United States, the war created what was called the Vietnam Syndrome, a deep reluctance to commit military forces overseas. It eroded public trust in government and the military, and the returning veterans were often met not with parades and gratitude, but with indifference or even hostility, a shameful chapter that many have worked hard to correct. The war also sparked a cultural revolution, changing American society, politics, and music forever. It forced a painful re-examination of America's role in the world. The Vietnam War was a tragedy born from the Cold War, colonialism, and nationalism. It's a complex story with no easy answers or clear-cut heroes and villains. It serves as a powerful reminder of the devastating human cost of conflict and the profound ways in which war can shape the destiny of nations for generations to come. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. We'll see you in the next one.